Welcome everyone to our second panel for the day. My name is Lisa Harris. I'm the Executive Director of Strolling of the Heifers, and this is our first ever completely virtual Slow Living Summit. We're going to give a few seconds for folks to join us before we begin. Numbers are still going up. We do want to thank our sponsors of the Slow Living Summit, Breakthrough Beverage and Meadows Beef Farm. They are responsible for helping us put all of this together.
Yeah, they were very flexible in a very different sort of summit this year. So
yep,
I'm happy for that. And hopefully we'll do a good enough job that, you know, we can keep.
I want to do it again.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we can get started. Again, I'm Lisa Harris. I'm the Executive Director of Strolling of the Heifers. This is the third day of our virtual Slow Living Summit. And I'm going to pass it over to our summit coordinator, Jen Brandt.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for everything you do and for being such a great teammate. Peter, too, even though you can't see or hear him, has also been instrumental and is, you know, there's a lot of the amazing behind the scenes work. And thanks everyone for joining. We are super excited. This has gone better than we could have imagined. And we're just excited that we can offer this to folks in many different places and then, you know, increase the accessibility in a lot of different ways. Rob and Ben and Jerry's in general has been a huge supporter of the Slow Living Summit and of Strolling of the Heifers for many years. Rob just keeps coming back, so it's wonderful and we really appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead and have him just kind of lead the way. I think Ben & Jerry's doesn't need too much introduction, but for those who don't know, it's the most delicious ice cream available on the free market. So I will go ahead and let Rob take it away, and we will take off our screens right now as well.
Okay, well, thank you, Jen and Lisa and Peter. It's really great. You know, it's too bad that we're not all in Brattleboro together, because that's always a wonderful time to actually be in the same space. But thankfully, we're able to, with this technology, be able to be together during the Slow Living Summit this way. So happy to be with you. And just for those of you who I don't know or we've never met, my name is Rob Mahalik. I'm the Social Mission Special Projects Director. I like to just call myself the Swiss Army knife of social mission at Ben & Jerry's. I've been around a long time at Ben & Jerry's, many decades, and I do a lot of different special things. I do want to call out and give some credit for this presentation to really the lead author of the presentation, which is our Global Sustainability Manager, Jenna Evans. And, you know, it's good to have good leading roles in terms of the different stakeholders. Then I wanted to make sure that Jenna Evans got a little credit for all of the work that's been done herein, although this is quite a team effort at Ben & Jerry's. Most of the presentation will be on our carbon reduction program. I do want to start, as I always like to start, for those of you who know Ben & Jerry's, you may be very well familiar with our three-part mission statement. It was one of the first to actually codify or memorialize a social purpose within a mission statement. We started in 1978 in a small scoop shop on a street corner across from City Hall in Burlington, Vermont. But by 1988, on our 10th year anniversary, we were traded on NASDAQ. So there were shareholders, a board of directors, and a shareholders meeting. And at that 1988 shareholders meeting, we actually published this three-part mission statement with a product, economic, and social mission. And of course, it was one of the first that actually put a social purpose. I always bring this up because this is not something that's just in a frame on a wall at Ben & Jerry's. This is still our North Star. It guides us in trying to put social purpose alongside economic and product purpose to actually create a model, a business model of linked prosperity. And it all ties into all of what we're thinking about in terms of the climate, and climate justice, but also economic justice and social justice herein. There, there's so many overlaps. And to the right on the screen, what you see is a progressive value statement that we wrote in 1997. It was one of the first statements, and it's actually prescient in what it foresaw. It talks about social and economic justice in a new way, that capitalism doesn't really create opportunities equally. And so we wanted our business to be a model of seeking out ways to support those on the economic margins and create new models of economic justice, but also to keep in mind the environmental connections that we have. And so just to summarize our core values, our business continues to stand for human rights and dignity throughout our business, social and economic justice, and environmental protection, restoration, and regeneration. Because we know that you could do one part of that, but if we're not regenerating the environment, then we may lose the healthy soil that we need to grow food, and we'll be in a lot of trouble. So that's just kind of a framework and a background about Ben & Jerry's for those of you who may not be so familiar with us. We use these core values, mission statements to really, again, guide our decisions and what we're trying to do in our business. And hopefully we can create a model that's both successful and creates the outcomes that we're looking for. So let's turn our attention to greenhouse gas, carbon footprint, all of that. I'm sure for most of you joining us today, you're very familiar with scopes 1, 2, and 3 as it relates to greenhouse gases. But just in case, essentially scope 1 is your responsibility for your direct emissions. Let's call it your brick and mortar, your company factories, and that kind of stuff. Your scope 2 are the indirect emissions, such as the greenhouse gas that's produced when getting electricity, so the electricity that comes to your operations. And then there's scope 3, which essentially is everything else. So for a business like Ben & Jerry's, it's essentially our value stream, downstream and upstream. So really, that's the biggest part of our greenhouse gas footprint. And so that's where we really want to be paying attention. Over the years, what we've realized is our work is getting much more complicated and sophisticated. Way back when, for those of you who do have a little bit of history with the company, you may remember Rainforests Crunch, which was a flavor that we came up with that the concept there was that if you could purchase Brazil nuts from the rainforest and make the rainforest economically more appealing and viable with standing trees and fruits and nuts, than cutting the trees down for other forms of agriculture. That was the competition. It was an economic solution to hopefully create better environmental outcomes in the end. And that was it was a novel idea, and many caught on to that. But over the years, what we realized is that there are a lot of things we need to do as a society, and a lot of the experts have said, we need to be doing things like putting a carbon fee on our carbon and getting good policy. So for us, in this timeline, what you see is that we started to take a look at those factors. What could we do in terms of a carbon fee? And where are the policies that we want to support as a company, and be out there and really campaigning, such as the Paris agreements way back when in 2015, and then looking at things such as science-based targets, which we'll get into in just a second. So over the years, we've been layering on the different aspects of how we can actually reduce our carbon footprint. Now, this is just another view of this over time. What I'd like to kind of do is just draw your attention. I tried to highlight, there's some warm and fuzzy blue around a couple of those items down below the timeline. One is in 2015, we actually put a price on our carbon. It was the same year that we completed a life cycle analysis so that we knew where that carbon is, and we'll get into that detail. So that was a key thing, because a lot of companies or a lot of organizations actually haven't done that, and we need to do that. And I think a lot of us on this call understand why we need to do that, because we can create a lot of benefits that have, maybe private profits, but then social consequences. And we haven't really priced in the social consequence of carbon and, how that affects our climate. Then in 2016, we actually introduced a non-dairy product, which is really important because a non-dairy product has a much lower carbon footprint, and it's a way that we could grow the company. We still have our dairy products, and quite honestly, the dairy ice cream is still growing, but to grow the company into the future without growing our carbon footprint, we need to look at ways we can do that. And so that's a significant decision over our timeline. And then way over to the right, we did finally get science-based targets approved. We submitted them to the Science-Based Targets Initiative. We'll get into that, but we think that that's an important step that organizations and companies need to take so that we really have some structure and discipline to the targets that we're claiming that we're going to reduce. We also want to call out some of our thought and research partners in this work. We know how to make ice cream, but we really need some of the thought leaders and the scientists and the people that are doing the experiments and the research to help us understand where within our business we can make some strides. And so we've been working with Green America, the University of Vermont. We're doing some major research with them. Again, the science-based targets. We've also been working with Native Energy, which is a Vermont-based company. And Native Energy has been helping us to implement some of the programs that we'll talk about in just a second. And Pure Strategies, which is based out of Massachusetts, which has helped a lot of companies look at their sustainability plans and help them to reduce their greenhouse gases. So part of what I want to get across there is, there's a lot of complexity to this, and it's going to take a lot of partnerships and collaboration to actually create the solutions that we need moving forward. So let's take a look at the carbon footprint for Ben & Jerry's. Again, a lot of stuff on this slide, but let me just draw your attention over to the pie chart. And what we found out was that, as you might suspect, dairy is over half of our carbon footprint. And then when we look at the other agricultural ingredients, we've got another 21%. So essentially about 75% of our carbon footprint of a pint of Ben & Jerry's is agriculture. A lot of people would suspect, hey, what about manufacturing or transportation? Well, they are a factor. And when you look at inbound and outbound transportation, that's got a nice 9% chunk there. But really, it comes down to agriculture. And just to kind of conceive of how much carbon there is in a pint of Ben & Jerry's, you can see on the screen, there's 3.3, the equivalent of 3.3 pounds of carbon per pint. So that would be 1.6 kilograms or 3.3 pounds. And that's 460,000 metric tons of carbon in Ben & Jerry's footprint. And just to kind of conceive of, oh, wow, that does sound like a lot. It is. it's a lot. So just what is the equivalent of 460,000 metric tons of carbon? Well, that would be about almost 52 million gallons of gasoline consumed. You can kind of scan the numbers on this, but it's a lot. I think one of my favorite numbers in terms of equivalent, it would be like driving your average passenger car 1 trillion miles to get up to 460,000 metric tons. So yeah, it's a big number, and we really have to lean in and figure out how we can reduce that over time. So like I said, it's about 3.3 pounds of carbon per pint, and that's the unit that we will use as a measurement unit, or 1.6 pounds of carbon for our non-dairy. So you can see it's about, half, so that's a good thing. And just kind of in the scope of food, like where does that land in the scale of food? All the way over to the left of this chart, the big bar, that's lamb. That's if you were to raise and harvest lamb. and beef. So you can see the animal products, the meat products are a big offender of climate change. Our pint kind of nestles in there between eggs and potatoes. And then our non-dairy is between milk and tomatoes, which kind of makes a nice sort of tempo and rhyme. But you can see where it lands, at least our products land on the food spectrum of greenhouse gas production. So since dairy is such a big deal for us, that's where we need to lean in. And like I mentioned early on in this session, we have put a fee on our carbon. So we put like $10 per metric ton on our carbon, and we use that as an internal fee, and that money goes directly to reduce our carbon footprint. And we're not really talking about carbon offsets or things such as that. We're talking about actually looking into our dairy and other agricultural supply chains and trying to figure out where can we reduce that carbon. So what we're looking at here is if we take that pie chart that we looked at earlier that breaks out where the carbon is, now we bring the big circle, that's just dairy. We're looking at dairy. And 47% of the issue is enteric emissions, and that's basically the cow's digestive emissions. Mostly it comes with burps. Many people like to have a little bit of ribaldry about the other end of the cow, but really most of the percentage is from the front end of the cow and burping. And so we know, okay, we got to look at that, and that means we got to look at nutrition. And there is some great research being developed on how we can actually reduce enteric emissions through the nutrition and the feed. We've got manure as the second highest percentage, and really managing manure is a key aspect of this. And then it goes all the way through feed, manure management, fertilizer, the inputs and stuff, where we can reduce that, and then a variety of other things. So what we've done is, we've mapped out, okay, where's the carbon in our supply chain? And let's go after that carbon, and let's use our carbon fee, the money that we're saving internally, and let's put it against some carbon initiatives. A little note about science-based targets. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is a group has put together a standard by which organizations and companies can submit a plan for how they're going to reduce their carbon over time. And that plan can be either approved or it can be rejected with certain corrective actions to modify the plan so that it can be approved. But what's important about this is it's science-based, and so it's not sort of whimsical public relations puffery at all. It's really kind of setting some real targets that will, if achieved, will help to limit the global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius by 2050, and help to cut those emissions. And so we submitted a plan. It took a little time, but we did get it approved. And basically what we're looking at, these are the major, what you're looking at here is the big red rectangles that are going around the big blue rectangles are basically the scope of our science-based targets. It's around 75 to 80% of our full footprint. There are some parts of it outside of our control, such as transportation. Once the product gets outside of our control and transportation, it's another area where we can influence, but it's more difficult for us to have the kind of reduction targets that we would hope for. But basically, working with the dairy farms that we work with, we can create the kind of interventions that we're looking for, and some of the other ingredients such as sugar and cocoa, vanilla, coffee. We're working with those supply chains to create greenhouse gas reductions and climate mitigation. Then we get into product packaging. We're working on that. We're working on reducing the petroleum-based laminates. We're a frozen product, we're a wet product, so we have to laminate our packaging. And what we're doing is looking for solutions that would exclude any kind of petroleum-based laminates and see if we can get into, bio-based laminates and reduce our carbon footprint there. And then there's a square over a 5% franchise. We have franchise scoop shops. And so we're working with our franchise scoop shop network to have programs that will help to reduce the carbon footprint of that network. So our overall goals are to reach 100% renewable energy for our operations, which is scope 1 and 2, by 2025. Now there is a little asterisk there. Ben & Jerry's is still a Vermont company. We're still run out of Vermont. We manage the entire global operation out of Vermont. But yes, we are part of Unilever. Unilever in its own right is quite a progressive multinational, multi-brand business. It has a lot of very ambitious goals in terms of its own carbon footprint and sustainability. But for the most part, we're very independent within that portfolio. And so why we have the asterisk is that we're going to be renewable by 2025, and then the rest of Unilever's goal is to be 100% renewable by 2030. And of course, that's a game changer, because the scale of Unilever is much greater than Ben & Jerry's, of course. We want to reduce our intensity by 40% by 2025. Now, I want to just focus a little bit on that word intensity. And again, I'm assuming a lot of people on this call will understand the distinction of intensity versus absolute. But what we're trying to do is that 3.3 pounds of carbon that's in a pint of Ben & Jerry's, we're trying to reduce that by 40% by 2025, and then 80% by 2050. But stay with me on this. Even though we're reducing the intensity per pint, by the year 2050, hopefully, if all things work out, we're going to be making a lot more pints. We're going to be producing a lot more, many more pints. So our absolute footprint will still have a tendency to increase over time, but we will reach a certain moment when that'll plateau and then start to come down, and that's what our game plan is. So we're very honest and transparent about the fact that we're working on an intensity reduction, not an absolute reduction, but you have to decrease your intensity before you can get to the absolute reduction. And we have a certain kind of faith that in the interventions that we're starting now, and the different research we're doing in agriculture, and the technologies that are being developed in agriculture for things like biodigesters and manure separators and all of the kinds of things that we can get into our agricultural footprint. We're hoping that over time there's going to be a lot more innovation in that, and we'll be able to actually make a real dent in our absolute footprint. But by achieving 80% intensity reduction by 2050, we actually will be doing a good job on the absolute footprint as well. All right, so how are we going to get there? How are we going to take that pint of Ben & Jerry's from 3.3 down to 0.6 pounds of carbon by 2050? And by the way, when you go to the market in 2050, the pint won't be a real teeny weeny pint like that. It'll still be the same size. It just won't have as much carbon in it. So the strategy is, as we've been discussing earlier, dairy is 53% of our footprint. So we need to really lean in on dairy, and then that other 21% of our agricultural footprint on the ingredients outside of it, the sugar and the cocoa, etc. But we can also look at our portfolio mix. As I mentioned earlier, we do now have non-dairy products, and that's helping to grow the company, but it's not growing the carbon footprint at the same rate. And then we still need to look at our scope 1 and 2 emissions in terms of our manufacturing plants and our operations. Even though it's a small percentage of our footprint, it's still important to dive into that. So dairy, again, we're working with, so 100% of our ice cream in the US is made in Vermont. And for the most part, we've been dealing with Vermont farmers over the years. There are a few that are in northeastern New York State as well, but essentially it's this milk shed that we're working in. We've been working with the St. Albans Cooperative Creamery over the years formally since 1985, when we built our first real manufacturing plant. The St. Albans Cooperative Creamery is now part of Dairy Farmers of America, or DFA, if you will, but we still have the same direct relationship and engagement. So we have a program that we call Caring Dairy. It's kind of a warm and fuzzy name, and that's for the nice external communications. But in Caring Dairy, we have a lot of very high standards for animal care, the care of the people within that supply chain, the workers and the farmers, and then the care for the earth, the soil, and the soil health. It really comes down to soil. If we don't have the good, healthy soil, which, by the way, we're losing, we're going to need to, need to lean in that area. I don't know if it's been noted in any previous presentations, but there was a report out of the United Nations not long ago that said if we keep going the way we're going, we'll only have 60 harvests left of healthy soil. That's not very many when you think of, time is a wink of an eye. And so it doesn't need to go that way. If we have more and more agricultural companies kind of wake up to that fact and acknowledge that fact and lean in, there are ways to keep our soil healthy and keep our environs healthy around that. So we're looking at a variety of interventions, as I was mentioning before, biodigesters, in terms of manure management, manure separators. We're looking at things such as cover crops and crop rotations and no-till or low-till cropping practices. And all of these, what all of these do is they help to not have a farm be a carbon emitter, but eventually, as you increase these practices, what we're trying to get to is actually have carbon insetting on the farm. And this is achievable. It's not, I think animal agriculture has been highly criticized over time, and there's good reason for that. But if done well, agriculture can be a solution. It doesn't have to be a problem. And so right now we're working with, again, Native Energy and Pure Strategies and the participating farms that are in the program. I should mention we have about, each year we enroll the number of farms that produce the volume of dairy that Ben & Jerry's needs to make ice cream in Vermont. So depending on if the farm size is larger or smaller, the number of farms in the program each year will go up and down. In years past, we've had as many as 80 Vermont farms, that's 80. But in recent years, it's been a little bit lower. There has been some farm consolidation in Vermont. And so some of the farms are getting bigger. And right now, last year we had about 70 some farms, and I think this year we're down to 60 some farms in the program. But those farms represent the volume of dairy that Ben & Jerry's needs to make ice cream. And so that's how we run that program. So the next area is ingredients. As I mentioned earlier, we work in global supply chains. We work with Fair Trade International on Fair Trade certified sugar, cocoa, banana, vanilla, coffee, and almonds as part of that supply chain. And within those supply chains, we've been working with cooperatives directly and producers directly, as well as we work with the Sustainable Food Lab, which is another wonderful Vermont-based company, but that works in global supply chains. And we're looking at interventions that can help, again, mitigate the climate effects and actually over time get to carbon insetting. That's what we ultimately want to do. And so we've been working with Fair Trade International, Sustainable Food Lab, and then the different producer organizations. For cocoa, we work with 4 cooperatives in Côte d'Ivoire, or the Ivory Coast. We work with vanilla producers in both Uganda and Madagascar. We get coffee from Mexico, and we get sugar from Belize, banana from Ecuador. We also get sugar from El Salvador. So what we do in these, we don't have an arm's length distance. We actually engage directly, again, in programs that we're funding to help mitigate the climate footprint in those supply chains. On the portfolio of products, basically it's, how can we increase the business, and not to be too redundant, but how can we have more products that can reduce the carbon footprint? And so far, the non-dairy products have been a part of that. The first non-dairy products we came out with started with primarily an almond-based foundation of the recipe. We are now looking into sunflower-based products. We do have some products now in the marketplace. They seem to be doing well and being received well. And so, working to grow the company outside of dairy. And again, if there are any dairy farmers on this, I know this is the Slow Living Summit and Strolling of the Heifers. Our dairy business is growing too, so we actually haven't had any fallback in that. So we think we can kind of grow the business in both ways, and then again with the interventions that we have in dairy, we can hopefully come out with the outcomes that we're looking for by 2050. And there may be ways within the recipe itself. Are there ways to have a good recipe? This is always kind of a little bit of a dangerous area to get into because we really protect our recipes. One of the things, by the way, some of you may know this, some of you may not. Why is Ben & Jerry's more expensive than other products? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there is more ice cream per square inch in a pint of Ben & Jerry's than there might be in a half a gallon of another product that's lower priced. And the reason for that is basically companies can just pump air into those products. It's just like whipped cream. When you're whipping your cream, you're just really whipping a bunch of air into it. It makes it nice and light and fluffy and everything. And that's kind of the same thing with ice cream or any one of those frozen products. The more air you put into it, the lighter it becomes and less dense. Now, our products have probably the least amount of air and the most amount of stuff per square inch. And that's kind of why they're so dense and a little bit, pricier than the other stuff. But my point in this is that when we start getting into the non-dairy products, we've been spending a lot of time in the kitchen, a lot of time with our chefs and food scientists to make that product worth, being in a Ben & Jerry's pint. And because the proof of the pudding's in the eating. And if you don't like it, you're not going to come back and get any more. And that's not good for the business. So thankfully, we've got a great group in the kitchen, and they've been coming up with some good recipes. But that's part of it is with the recipes, can we continue to actually reduce our carbon footprint? And then the last piece of this is in our scope 1 and 2 emissions in our manufacturing sites. One of the things is, being based out of Vermont, and I don't know how many of you on this call are, based in Vermont and how many of you are outside of Vermont, but Vermont has a pretty green, if you will, or a low greenhouse gas utility footprint. But we're still looking at, how can we increase that within our manufacturing sites in terms of, alternative energy, renewables, and things such as that. So we still have some work to do there. So this actually takes me through. This took me a little less time than I thought, but I think we can open this wide open to questions or challenges or curiosities. That is our primary work that we're doing in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, and we've kind of covered the whole footprint. So let's see if we can open it up maybe to any of the questions that may have come in already, or if not, this is a great time to start getting your questions in. Jen, how can people get their questions there?
So they can, there's a Q&A box and people can type that directly in there. And we do have a question so far. We also, there was a question on a Facebook group that I don't know if this person is actually on the call, but I'm happy to ask it. And it's something that, you know, you kind of, I'm sure that you've heard many, many times. How do you reconcile being part of a larger corporation, Unilever, with your mission? Like how does, I know that there was actually I worked at Ben & Jerry's in Middlebury when the buyout was happening. Ate a lot of ice cream that year. So how do you know, and I know that there were certain things that you said had to sort of happen for that to go through. So just, yeah, if you can maybe speak to that.
Well, just a little bit of history on the Unilever acquisition of Ben & Jerry's, which took place in the year 2000. There was quite a lot of genius that was part of Ben & Jerry's leadership on the board of directors, and of course our co-founders, Ben and Jerry. And they worked out an acquisition agreement with Unilever, which was really, it was unparalleled. And quite honestly, the acquisition agreement itself, although it wasn't a direct forerunner of the benefit corporation movement or the B Corp movement, where, you know, social purpose is part of the attributes of the business model, the acquisition agreement set up a way for Ben & Jerry's to maintain both its independence and its social mission. What it did was it set up an independent board of directors of Ben & Jerry's that had power and authority over the social mission, like legal power and authority over the social mission, so that the social mission wouldn't go away over time. And they have done a great job working with both Ben & Jerry's, you know, management and leadership, as well as Unilever management and leadership, to maintain the social mission over time. So that's one way we've been able to maintain that. But I do have to say, Unilever is one of the more, I'm not going to say one of the more, it is the most progressive multinational company that I'm aware of. It under the leadership of Paul Polman, who has now since moved on, but Paul Polman set up a Unilever Sustainable Living Plan that had very ambitious goals in terms of reducing, energy, waste, carbon, throughout all of the different businesses within Unilever's portfolio, and really set key performance indicators and targets each year that the companies were held to. So of all the multinationals in the world, it really was a wonderful marriage. And there's been great internal exchange. You know, Unilever has sent, well, Paul Polman as CEO, you know, the CEO of Unilever ends up going to places like Davos, Switzerland, and speaking on global stages. He came to Vermont and, you know, wanted to directly understand the Ben & Jerry's model. And not only did he come to Vermont once, but he came to Vermont twice, and then he came to Vermont 3 times, and then he sent his entire executive suite to Vermont. And, you know, we shared our model and our value system and the way we make decisions. And we think to some degree that's influenced the way Unilever does things, but also Unilever has some great efficiencies and their own people within supply chains and their own scientists and researchers that can help Ben & Jerry's also reduce its carbon footprint. I'll give you one example, and I don't mean to run on here. Way back when, through Unilever, we were very aware of freezers that had a much lower carbon footprint. And so when Ben & Jerry's looks at its entire value chain, we look at it from seed to the final delivery of the product. And so there were some freezers that used a inert gas system that was very climate safe, and they were being built in Europe, but they were not legal in the US. So Unilever worked with Ben & Jerry's to actually bring those freezers into the US. It took us 3 years to do that. We had to petition the Environmental Protection Agency, and we had to prove that these freezers were safe and reliable and all of that. But eventually we got it through, and we started to bring those freezers into the US. They're 40% more efficient, and they have zero carbon, footprint. So this is the kind of thing where this relationship has worked out to a lot of benefits.
Awesome. That's huge. That's like unheard of. That's all right. So I will actually kick off with the first question that is not from me or from somebody on Facebook. Thomas Newmark asks, Rob, you're assuming that the beef and lamb are fired on the left-hand side of your CO2 emissions chart. What about beef and lamb raised holistically What about dairy produced regeneratively?
Thank you, Tom. Great question. And yes, you're right. There can be, again, one of the things that I was mentioning early on, it might have gone unnoticed, is that animal agriculture done right can actually be a climate solution. We know that, if you have a fully integrated operation where the animals are part of the ecosystem that helps to keep the soil healthy and helps to inset carbon, yes, you can actually create good solutions with all of that. Lamb, beef, dairy, and those are some of the things that we're trying to work on, and so are some other companies within. And I'll just keep it in dairy. There's some great work being done by Danone, which is most people in America would know it as Danone, but Danone is doing some great work, and there are others as well.
Awesome, thank you. Move on to Julie Snorek. Does B&J seek out specifically farmers who are using regenerative practices? Also, is B&J thinking about measuring the GHG questions of its farms? And yeah, that's above my pay grade, so I'll let you answer that.
It's a great question. What we're doing is this program that I mentioned before, called the Caring Dairy Program, and that's the way we have named it over the years. We actually enroll farms, so there's a kind of a mutual relationship where farms that are looking to either adapt or revise their operations from where they are right now, will look to enroll in the Ben & Jerry's program. Now, once they enroll in the Ben & Jerry's program, they're required to actually achieve these standards that we're trying to achieve. And one thing I should tell you is that we don't just ask them to achieve these standards because it's hard work and it's extra work without providing some incentives. So we have been providing premiums over the years. Now, for those of you who have been paying attention to the dairy industry, the family dairy industry in the U.S. is almost an endangered species. They've had headwinds and crosswinds that have been really difficult over the last 5 years. And so we've been asking farms to raise their standards of regenerative practices or sustainable practices. But if they do so, if they reach a certain level, we pay them more in premiums. And if they reach a higher level than that, we pay them even more. Now, over the years, it's a continual improvement program. We're always trying to tinker with it and see how we can make it better. And as we go forward, we've been taking it to a level now where we're asking them to actually do these specific regenerative practices that will eventually get us to carbon insetting. And again, those that can achieve that will get higher premiums than those that can't. But everybody that's in the program is moving forward with more sustainable regenerative practices. So it's a bit of an enrollment program. And so farms opt in, but once they sign up, then they have to achieve what we're trying to achieve in the program. Oh, Jen, I think you're on mute.
Yep, I definitely was. Keep doing that. Anne Bransfield asks, could you please speak to the 3-year process of signing the Milk with Dignity Agreement? Could you also talk about how you are caring for the people in the supply chain, i.e., the Caring Dairy strategy you mentioned?
So I think I understand. I'm not sure if I understand if the question is, since we've signed up for the Milk with Dignity program, how it's going, or why it took us seemingly, a few years to actually get signed up. I'll kind of answer a little bit of both. When Migrant Justice came to us with the Milk with Dignity program, it was a program that at that time was in a draft form. It was in a solid structural draft form, but it still needed to be sorted out by it's a worker-led program. So the farm workers were actually designing the program. What we did, why it took so long to actually sign up to the program, was they were still working through the actual detail of the program. And so we wanted to make sure, well, we're in. We actually just, over the time, we never left the table. We were always talking. And as they brought back different versions and different iterations to us, it got to a point in time where it's like, okay, that's a program that we can sign up, because part of what we wanted to do is have a program that would work, a program that could be scaled. If a program, if you start a program that just can't be successfully completed or scaled up, then what's it worth? So that's why it took us a few years to actually get to signing up for the program, and all the parties were working diligently on both sides with all the best intentions, and we got there. So that was good. And then since then, it's been it's been working out fairly well. Now it's a new program, it's an early program. And again, all the different players are working on how it can be successful and sustainable and scalable. And I do have to say, there are a lot of pioneering dairy farms in Vermont who were the first to sign up, first ever, for this kind of a program anywhere in the world that we know of. And they've been, crucial to, helping this program succeed and being able to provide the feedback loop that where Migrant Justice and the Milk with Dignity program can receive that and see how the program can be adjusted and successful. So I think all the parties have been working on it. We believe it's been having great benefits for the farm workers. The idea of the program, with it being at its ultimate success, it would be a great program for the farmers and the farm workers, where it's a problem-solving program. It's a solution-oriented program. And so it's not a gotcha program. It's like, hey, how can we solve problems for farmers and farm workers so that their operations are successful? Because, ultimately, farm workers want to have successful farms to be working on, and farmers want to be successful to keep their farms going. So everybody's in this. Everybody's got skin in the game on this one. So far it's been going okay. I think the thing that is of interest to all of us in this area of work is how to get this program to scale up and grow. So that's the next stage. But that's really a question for Migrant Justice and the Milk with Dignity program.
So I just do want to say that she followed up and said, Anne said that she meant the length of the time, just to make that clear.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go.
I'm going to let Lissa take over some questions right now.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jen. Our next question is from Julie Snorick. Julie asks, do you anticipate having to pay more for milk produced on farms where there is greenhouse gas sequestration going on? If so, what is the percentage increase you are considering for this value?
It's a great question, and it's a complicated question to ask, and it's a complicated question to answer, and here's why. Pricing for dairy is based on a federal system, and so what a dairy farm will get will be based on either the federal system price, or in the case of organic, you actually have contract prices. What we've been doing is we've been actually creating a system of premiums, which we've been paying over the years. Let's see, last year, I don't have this totally audited, but last year we were well over $4 million in direct premiums to the farmers that were in the Caring Dairy program to achieve these higher standards of dairy. So while we might not necessarily be able to calculate like what per hundredweight, because dairy, for those of you who know this, but for those of you who don't know this, dairy is priced at 100 pounds of dairy, or 100 pounds of milk, and they call it a hundredweight. And so that's the price, the pricing unit that we use. And we haven't really, well, over time we have put a few cents per hundredweight above and beyond to guaranteeing things like non-RBGH, non-recombinant bovine growth hormone. But over the years, with the sustainable programs that we've had in Caring Dairy and the regenerative programs we have with Caring Dairy, we've just put a set of premiums that actually serve as both a little more financial support, but also it helps to raise the level of the farm operations. So that's really critical too. I will say in the Milk with Dignity program, that's a third-party program, kind of like fair trade is a third-party program for sugar and cocoa, et cetera. So with the Milk with Dignity program, we actually pay a premium associated with that program as well. So that's to help, the premium is designed to help the farmers actually achieve the standards for their farm workers. And there is, for certain farm workers that qualify, there's a lot of math in this, they actually get a little bit of a bonus pass-through. And so, yes, so I guess the answer is we've been using premiums as a way to do this, but I think, we have to look at the whole federal pricing system. So we need to look at policy. All of these things need a whole set of players to actually adjust what they're doing to help farmers in the end.
Thank you, Rob. Our next question is from Marilyn Beauchat. I'm sorry, Marilyn, if I mispronounced your name. Since transportation is less than 10% of your carbon footprint, it seems important for you to reduce your carbon emissions in this area as well. With electrified delivery vans, trucks, and longer distance tractor trailers under development by Tesla and others, it seems like you will be able to greatly reduce this portion of your footprint in the near future. Are you working with anyone to accomplish this?
We are. So in reducing our carbon footprint, we really need to go after the bigger slices of the pie. And so that's where we're working in dairy, and we're working in the other parts of agriculture and packaging as well. Now, transportation, as noted, is, it's about 10% of our footprint. But the trucks and the people who are transporting it are actually outside of our ownership or control. They're independent businesses. So yes, we have to work with them, and yes, we are. But it's where we have to influence them to make those changes. And so the way we're approaching that is this is where the relationship with Unilever comes in, because really Unilever has more leverage and more ability to make that change than Ben and Jerry's does, because again, they're closer to and a part of that distribution network where we aren't. So that's where, we're not saying we're not doing anything about it. We're just saying that that's a little more complicated. And what we want to do is we want to achieve results and outcomes on those areas of greater carbon footprint first, and then get there. But in the meantime, there are conversations happening about that. So that's going to be a little bit down the road, but it's a good question.
Great, thank you so much. Our next comment and question is from Strolling of the Heifers founder, Orly Munsing. Orly has been on every single one of our calls and panels, and I've never known anybody more dedicated and passionate about these issues that you're talking about, Rob. So Orly's comment is, Rob, thank you for all you do and for lending your time once again to the Stroll and Slow Living Summit. And then her question is, as climate pollution rises and our politicians delay action, our president pulling us out of the Paris Agreement, what action will ensure we protect our state, country, and planet?
Well, it's a great question. And I think we can't really tolerate the fact that the administration has pulled us out of Paris. I think we have to behave and continue to move forward with those kind of policies being supported. Now, whether they're supported at the state level, which again, a lot of states are coming up with plans that will supersede and ascend what the federal government is doing, either in Vermont or California or you name it. Where we look is what we try to do is identify what policy is going to be effective, and can we weigh in or support policy either at a state level or a federal level to push things forward. Now, I will say there is a great movement. Again, there's the benefit corporation movement. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, there is a program run by B Lab, which has set up a standard for businesses to, you take an assessment, you get measured, you get audited, and if you have a particular score, you are showing that you are operating under the highest standards of social, economic, and environmental criteria. And so B Lab has set up that criteria. And so there's a whole community of certified B Corps. There are a lot in Vermont, by the way. Oh, and I realize there are people outside of Vermont on this call. But so there are a lot of, I think there are pockets like Portland, Oregon, Boulder, Colorado, Vermont, North Carolina, and San Francisco and Los Angeles, California. There are pockets where there are great groups of B Corps that are striving to take climate action within their own companies, but also advocate for strong policy at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. So that B Corp movement is starting to have a lot of influence and starting to get some momentum. But we also are with some nonprofit organizations such as Ceres, which has an advocacy arm that goes by the acronym of BICEP. And we're members of that organization. And that group actually does lobby within Washington for stronger policy. And there's the American Sustainable Business Council, which is also kind of a very progressive group that is in Washington lobbying for strong climate policy. So, you know, you have to attack it all different ways. You have to attack it at a personal level where you can make your own changes in your lifestyle, but at a corporate level, and we're seeing more of that in the B Corp community, and then at policy level, and we're seeing between NGOs and businesses actually weigh in on stronger federal policy and stronger state policy.
Thanks, Rob. So we have a couple follow-up questions, but I did want to get to one question from Cynthia Bottoms first. She asks, how do you get the word out, educate people about the situation of dairy farmers to the public, as those here already know? What can we do to help dairy farmers, and what is the best way to? Thanks. P.S. Going out to buy a pint or two.
Oh, thank you for that. Well, it's a good question. And I think we need to do a better job of actually communicating the situation with dairy farms. We have an internal team at Ben & Jerry's, which has actually been convened to just do this. We internally, we've said, you know what, we haven't been telling this story well enough. It hasn't been as visible as we want it to be. And so we're actually working on different ways to have a methodical sort of communication plan to start telling this story. Now, June is actually Dairy Month, so there's a great opportunity. Of course, everybody's a little bit off the rails with you know, our COVID crisis and the certain ways of working that we're operating under right now. But we agree, we need to do a better job of telling that story. And so we do have a team internally, and you know, and we'll reach out to other players within the dairy industry to see where we can do a better job of that. So that recognizes that we got to do something better, and so now we've got something in place. I wish I could tell you exactly what, but I can't right now.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't add, one of the ways you could do that is have a giant parade where you march cows down Main Street.
Right, of course. Of course. Brilliant. It's a brilliant idea.
Honestly.
Our first follow-up question is from Julie Snorik. She's following up on the caring dairy response. How do they measure the level of change on farms?
Okay, yes, I forgot to answer that part of the question. So we are setting up, well, we do have a series of metrics already. And actually, we're working with an industry group now to make sure that we have a really good set of metrics, specifically with carbon and, you know, climate change. But we have had a set of metrics that we've been measuring over time, such as percentage of acreage that is cover cropped, percentage of acreage that uses no till or low till. You know, these are practices that, if they're in place, will help to mitigate climate change. And actually, eventually, when we get all this completely in place, we'll start insetting carbon. So we do have metrics on that. And we've been seeing in our group I don't have them at the top of my head, but we've been seeing a huge increase in those practices such as cover cropping, crop rotations, no-till, low-till, really high percentages in the carrying dairy program. Again, based on providing the incentives, you do this, we'll pay you more. And then of course we all benefit because the operation is much more sustainable. So I will say that we're just finishing up, every year we do an annual report, which we publish online. The current report is for 2019. It should be published sometime this month. It has to go through, it actually goes through an audit process. It goes through a review process. Our independent board of directors, a social mission look at it. So it has a lot of gates to get through. It's been through most of them, and now it's actually in the process of designing for online publication. So hopefully we'll see it up sometime in mid to late June. And that will have that has a lot of information in it, but it'll have a lot of information about our greenhouse gas program, but also our dairy program, and other programs such as our social equity program, both internal and external. We're trying to become the company that we aspire to be, and we know we've got a long way to go when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that report is a great report to look at. Right now, the report that's online is kind of old. It's like from 2018. This report is going to be on 2019, which I know was almost 6 months ago. No, it was 6 months ago. But the report itself is written with both a rear view mirror and looking through the windshield, because we're talking about what we're doing this year too. So it's a nice report to get all of the different details, information, some statistics and metrics too.
Thank you, Rob. I think you may have answered our next question, but I'll ask it anyway, just in case you want to add anything. This is also from Marilyn.
Yeah.
She writes, our Black friends are heralding the Ben & Jerry's anti-racist response. Could you tell us what has been going on at Ben & Jerry's that informed that response?
This is a centuries-old problem, and it's going to take us a long time to actually get on the right road. And I just want to share that Ben & Jerry's years ago, and I can't remember exactly how many years ago, but let's just say it was about 5 years ago, realized that in terms of social equity and diversity and inclusion, we weren't really the company we wanted to be. And so we invited up a lot of the leaders that you're seeing on TV these days, a lot of the leaders in the, in civil rights and, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We invited them up to Vermont to have a town hall. And we asked them, and these were really some of the top experts. If I were to tell you who came, you would say, oh, I saw them on MSNBC last night. But anyways, we sat and listened, and it was leadership and staff. We listened to them to help us understand what we didn't even know to ask ourselves. And of course, that took us right away to implicit bias. And so what we did was we started to work with a couple of these organizations that were really good to consult us in the path and the plan to really become the company we aspire to be, a company that really is diverse and equitable and inclusive. And so we started doing things which may sound familiar to many on this call. We started to do implicit bias training. And then we started to do other workshops on really learning the history of structural and institutionalized racism in this country. I will tell you, it was shocking to me to learn, and I'm ashamed to say this, but my father is a World War II veteran, and he came home and he had all the benefits of the GI Bill and blah, blah, blah. Well, the Black GIs who came home from World War II, who put their lives on the line, they didn't get the same benefits. They got blackballed. They didn't get the mortgages. They couldn't get the housing that they should have gotten. And while I understood there was a lot of underlying structural issues, for 400 years, that little illustration woke up this guy's head to say, that's nuts. I can't believe that happened. And that was federal policy written into federal books. And they showed it in this one documentary that I was watching. And it was that kind of aha moment that said, wow, I'm complicit because I've been part of a structural system that I've been just turning my head and ignoring. And so that's what's been going on inside Ben & Jerry's. And we've been working with a group by the name of Race Forward, which works with municipalities, organizations, corporations to help design plans of how to actually work through the stages. You have to work through this slowly. You know, we may have heard of this fact that, you know, a lot of white people want to do some good, but sometimes when you're in a hurry, you could do more harm than good. So you really need to kind of learn things about structural racism and then figure out what you can do to start changing your own behavior and then your community behavior. And in community, I mean, wherever you're either working or, you know, day to day, and then your larger community, you know, where you live, and then the nation. So it is a slow step process. It's a total marathon. This is not a sprint. I think what's really encouraging about this current moment, and I'm old enough to have lived through, I was young, but I lived through the civil rights movement in the moment. And, you know, when this all started, I said to my wife, I said, man, this is reminding me of 1968. And of course, now we've heard that a lot. But what's different about now than 1968 is white people are finally understanding that we have been part of the problem by being silent and being complicit. And you have to get over that discomfort with yourself. It's not about you. It's about the structural racism. And so what we've been doing at Ben & Jerry's is we've been trying to you know, work through those stages. We have a lot of internal working groups that look at, you know, company culture, diversity of suppliers, you know, our own kind of language, and, you know, do people feel included and supported or not? And so there's that side. And then externally, what people see more often is our campaigns, you know, where we're supporting Black Lives Matter or Color of Change or the Advancement Project, different organizations that are really at the front lines of actually changing things like criminal justice reform and voting rights and things such as the Poor People's Campaign and Reverend Barber. So, you know, there's just so much to do, and it's just time to do it.
Rob, just to follow up on that, do you have any advice for smaller businesses who don't have the outreach capacity that Ben & Jerry's has, and or the connections or the ability to, you know, put a bunch of staff onto one issue to work to figure out what to do? Do you have any advice for those smaller businesses?
You know, there are a lot of resources. I think education, you know, it really is about doing that, the individual work, and part of the individual work is really learning things. And there are a lot of resources available in terms of reading. I'm just wondering how we could, I don't have a reading list that I could put on the chat box right now. And I don't know how effective we might be in trying to figure out how to move that to people who are on this call and who are interested in that. But what I could do is send a list maybe to Jen and Lissa, and then maybe if people want to get that kind of reading list, that would be good. And I think you start there. And what that does is that kind of turns the light bulbs on, and that helps you to think through what the next steps might be.
That's just a nice thing we can send out to really every single person. And, you know, we have to do something, right? You got to start somewhere. So it's a good start. So yeah, so I was going to say thank you. I think that's the last of the questions that we had, unless Lissa has anything else. I will personally just say thank you so much. And this is such a great call. I mean, it's been very thematic so far throughout the event. We've all touching on the same things. I think we're all thinking about the same things, and just so great to hear that there's positive change that's actually happening, and especially from such a, you know, well-respected huge company like Ben & Jerry's.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And, you know, I hope it's been beneficial in some small way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rob, for being on the call. Thank you to our attendees. This is recorded, and it will be able to be accessed by all our attendees. And because it's being recorded, I have to say happy birthday to Jen Brandt. It is her birthday today. And I wanted to be on every single recording we do today. So happy birthday, Jen, again.
That's great.
Thank you.
Rob, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure, and I appreciate all of your experience, your wisdom, sharing it with us and our attendees.
Well, thank you.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you back here tomorrow We have another lineup of awesome panels. We have at 1 o'clock our financing farming panel with Julie Snork, who's one of our attendees today. And we also at 3 o'clock have our panel on agriculture policy in a time of uncertainty with David Zuckerman, our Lieutenant Governor. So I hope you'll be there and join us for that. And have a good night, everybody.
Night. Thank you, everyone.